Board lecture. And I'm Beth Feynman, I'm president of Tau Sigma Delta, and I'd just like to welcome you guys to the lecture. All right, without a whole lot further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker this afternoon. His name is Michael Malone. He comes to us from Dallas, from Michael Malone Architects. And he's the incoming president of Texas Society of Architects, and we'd actually like to present him with this silver medal. You please come on up. Yeah. Thank you so much. No problem.
Wow. I was not a great student in college, and the closest I ever got to anything with an honor society was the posters on the elevator door announcing there was a meeting. So this is a big deal for me. I had never been on your campus before. This is a terrific place. If you come from Dallas, where I am, your images of Texas Tech are kind of limited, and you kind of picture cowboys on the prairie. This is somewhat different than that. I was very impressed with what you have. But I have had a lot of friends and acquaintances over the years associated with this place. Dean Vernoy is a friend of mine, somebody I admire a lot, and I actually think he's a state treasure, and you're really fortunate to have him running this institution. And those of you that don't know him well, I would suggest strongly that you try to do that before you leave. You have a lot of distinguished graduates, people that came before you that are out there doing really remarkable things. My first boss, when I got out of college, I went to Auburn University. In 1981 was a man named Robert Dedamore, who was a terrific person to kind of mentor somebody new and young in the profession who didn't know anything. I thought I knew everything. I was soon to find out I didn't. But he was really terrific. One of my first employees after I started my firm was a man named David Droz, who has a firm in Dallas, Droz Rady Architects, who's an extremely talented and intelligent guy. Really a terrific man, and you might kind of familiarize yourself with him. And then, how many of you know Mark Wellen from Midland, the architect? He, in my opinion, the best architect in the state of Texas, really an exceptional person, and he went to school here. And his firm, Rotenberry Wellen's work is beautiful. This month in the issue of Texas Architect, there's one of his houses, and it's outstanding building. So all of those people bring honor to this institution, and I have a feeling all of you know just how important that is for the perception of you when you get your degrees, that the people who went before you really set the bar. No matter what you did or how strong your own experiences are, we all judge you by the people we met that went there before, which is why you're glad you didn't go to Texas A&M. So my favorite Texas Tech student, you all know John? John, this is our model shop where John spent the summer building a giant 1-inch scale model of a house we were doing, a 22,000 square foot house, and the finished model was about, what, 2.5 feet high, 12 feet long, and 8 feet deep. And it was so big that they had to build it in pieces. This is Travis Schneider, who's a junior at UT, and had worked for us this summer also. So this is the model in full scale. And there's Travis on the side there, give you an idea of how big this thing was. The only way they could build it was in 2 by 2 by 2 blocks. So each of those pieces comes apart. It fits together like a giant jigsaw puzzle. And it took us multiple truckloads to get it to this photo studio where we shot it this summer. So it gives you an idea of the scale when you kind of see this. It's not even the whole house. It's just the front third of the house. So in our office, we do a lot of big single-family residential, and this is the insane kind of thing that we're involved in. So you can see there the roof trusses and the window mullions. It's a pretty complete model. And we're moving to new offices, and we've built a special place for this model to sit, so it'll be there forever, because I'll never have another client pay me to do this. So here it is in all the little pieces. You can see how it is. How many of you are originally from Texas? A lot. How many of you aren't from Texas? Not very many. Do you like it here? Has this been a good place for you? Why are you studying architecture? I know it's kind of a silly question to ask. I want to show you a photograph, tell you a little bit. Okay, you see this crazy group of drunken people? My wife and I are the two bright smiling ones at the end. This is sort of one of those alcohol-induced smiles where you don't really remember taking the picture. But the people in this photograph are the cluster of friends that are the closest to my wife and I. They have children that play club soccer with my daughters, which means I spend every weekend and most nights of the week somehow involved in soccer. The guy on the far end over there in the blue shirt is probably going to win the Nobel Prize for medicine. He invented the robotic technology that does prostate surgery. It's an amazing, amazing thing, and he holds 4 or 5 other patents too. The woman next to him is a former federal prosecutor for the New Orleans district, puts away drug lords and terrorists and all kinds of other things. The blonde woman next to her runs the company that makes all the private label stuff you get at Michael's. When you go to the art supply store and you see all that ugly stuff, the silk flowers and the rubber stamps and the pads, and that's all her company. My wife in the orange dress runs marketing for Hewlett-Packard. The guy in the gray shirt runs sales for Putnam's Investments. Huge, huge, very, very successful company. The woman with the blonde hair and the black sweater runs Freeman Exhibitions, which is an enormous, big, multi-billion-dollar company in Dallas that puts on every major show in the world, the Consumer Electronics Show, the Auto Show in Detroit, the Republican National Convention, all the other things. And the guy at the end is her husband, Steve, who's a kept man. Now, the interesting thing about this group of people is that every one of these people is more accomplished than I could ever hope to be. But when we get together socially, what we talk about is what I do. They all want to talk about buildings that I'm working on, projects that I'm working on, the people I'm doing them for. We never talk about them because they've been very successful. They make a lot of money, but they don't make space. They don't make buildings. They don't change the way that people live and see the world. And that's the thing that you're going to do. You're going to walk out of here in a few years, some of you sooner than that, and you're going to have the opportunity to make buildings and make spaces. And I will tell you, it is the very best thing in the whole world to do. There is nothing more fun or more exciting. And the opportunities that you have are overwhelming, and I hope you'll be excited. Architecture is hard. Has anybody experienced that, or has this been a cakewalk for most of you? Architecture is a hard thing to do, and it's even harder when you're doing it for clients. I've been struck by this idea that when you're in school, the people who are the critics of the projects you're doing are other architects. You know, they're your professors who understand what we do and what we think about and how to make buildings and how to make space. So we have dream clients. They don't have any money, but they're great clients for everything else. And so when we go out in the real world, we are working for the dumbest people in the world who don't know anything about what we do, but they have the money. So they become very, very, very important. One of the other things is when you see magazines that have pictures of projects, these incredible things that you see, and you're overwhelmed by how beautiful they are, think about a couple things. First of all, they had to convince a client to do it. And any of you that have had to ever sell any idea to somebody who doesn't know anything about architecture at all will realize in a few years how hard that is. Secondly, they had to get the client to pay for it. And not just the fees for you, but the cost of construction. And those very elaborate, very specialized buildings cost way more than dumb, stupid, simple buildings that you see surrounding us everywhere. And then finally, they had to survive the process with their egos and their sense of self-worth and their belief in what they were doing intact. And everything that happens out there in the real world environment does everything it can to beat that out of you. It's a miserable, miserable thing. Except that at the end, you do get to have that building, you get to point to it, and you get to say, I did that. And that makes it all pretty much worthwhile. Now, just to tell you a little bit about myself. I went to Auburn University. That's me with the hair. In 1981, I went to Europe on a study abroad program. So I know you guys have all done this. And on that trip, one of the things we did was draw in sketchbooks. Anybody draw anymore? When you come to interview, show real drawings. It's really valuable to people like me when it happens. So we went on this study abroad trip, and we drew a lot. And we met interesting people. I was at the Palazzo del Te, and all these kids thought I was a basketball player because I was tall. Isn't that the natural thing? You see somebody tall, you think of basketball. So they all wanted my autograph. So then I made them sign my sketchbook because it was less painful. So on that trip, in sketchbooks, we documented buildings. And I think some of you that have been abroad have probably done this kind of thing. But what this did for me was making drawings like this. For the first time, I wasn't just sketching to sketch. I was sketching to record and remind myself what was out there. Have any of you sort of made that correlation between drawing and memorizing things? If you draw a space, you'll remember it forever. But if you take a photograph of it, you'll have a really great photograph of it. But it takes a lot of time. It's slow to do. So the teachers I had made us do drawings like this, you know, sort of plan analysis of these buildings and understand them. And so I spent a lot of time drawing. And it's funny because when I got home, my mother and father said, well, why did we pay for you to go on this trip? Because all you did was make drawings. And I said, well, that was the whole idea of the trip. And neither of them are architects. So drawings like these are my legacy. This is the way that I taught myself about architecture. I had brilliant, fabulous, talented teachers, but until this trip, which I took my last semester in college, I really didn't understand what we did or the value of it. So the program was heavy on Renaissance and Baroque architecture, mostly because of the dynamics of things like the form and geometry, proportion, all those things that are important to all of us. And so we drew everywhere. We made a lot of sketches, and that drawing and that constant pattern of drawing became the way that I started to see architecture and understand it. And so when I saw buildings and pieces like this, I made drawings all the way through. And what's interesting is I have sketchbooks now that go back 30 years, and they're still active in a part of my life. So any of you know this building, Charles Henry McIntosh Hill House in Hillingsburg? It's one of the most beautiful buildings I've ever been in, and from this photograph, you would never really understand what it is. But when you go there and you see it, and you can make drawings of it and understand the details and things, like I said, it was life-changing, and it made me see it in a whole different way. So these are bad photographs made by a guy with a SLR camera in a room where you couldn't use a flash, trying to hold it still, leaning against a wall, and then the much better drawing on the side. And then Jorn Utzon, who most of us know for the Sydney Opera House. This is a terrific church in Lagskevaret outside of Copenhagen, Denmark. It's all done in poured place concrete. It's a really tremendous thing. And so little drawings like this were a way to memorize and remember the things that were there. And then some of you may have seen this building. This guy did a lot of good work in the last century. And so making drawings of that, understanding it, again, drawings of the wall with the punched openings in it were a way to understand the proportioning system and how it all worked and went together. And so these kinds of things are what I do to this day. And John's been in our office and he's seen this is still a big part of it. So not only understanding and seeing these are my photographs. They're really bad photographs, and you can say that, but you won't hurt my feelings. But it gave me a way to sort of understand this. So those are little things. And one other building in Riola, which is outside of Siena, there's this terrific Alvar Aalto church. One of the last things he did before he died. Really spectacular church. And again, these are travel sketches from that view. And then my personal favorite architect of all time. One of the things, the reason I showed you these is you'll notice that most of these drawings were focused in on smaller pieces and details instead of the overall composition. When I was in school and designing projects, which I'm sure is different than all of you, I was usually worried about the big picture, sort of the big box and the way it was all put together. And I really wasn't thinking much about the details of how they put together. We didn't have a comprehensive studio, so I never thought about the buildings in terms of how they might all work in one time. And so when all these projects I went to see in Europe, the thing that fascinated me was the way they were all put together and how they were made. And so looking at that, I also realized that on small projects, the kinds of things that I would likely do in my life, I could have a big impact in little bitty ways and things that people would touch and see. And that was a big revelation to me. So spatially rich and detailed, really great materials, those are the takeaways. Well, so when I got back from school, I went to work in a giant corporate firm in Houston, a horrible firm, they're still there. But hiring me didn't ruin them. But I started to do drawings of art and paintings that I liked because I was really mind-numb in the environment I was working in. Now, none of you will do that. You will all go to work in interesting, exciting firms where the first day on the job they're going to say they hired you to design their way out of all their problems. That didn't happen with me. I worked in places where they gave me horrible things to do. So I got into this pattern of studying art by drawing it. So what I would do is, this is Clifford Still Any of you been to Denver to see the Clifford Still Museum? It's fantastic, and the art is even better than the building, and the building's pretty terrific. So I had painters and artists who I admired, and I made drawings and sketchbooks, and what those did was it allowed me to understand their color theory, allowed me to understand composition, allowed me to understand layering of spaces, and so drawings like this became good tools for me to sort of think on another level. Plus, copying masters is always a good way to learn things. This Henri Matisse, wonderful piece from Paris. These are paper cutouts. Richard Diebenkorn, one of my favorite artists. And as you can see, these are drawn with pen and Prismacolor. They're all just layers of Prismacolor built up. Morrison Hartley, Gustav Klimt. So some work better. So the big challenge that happened is that finally I got rid of all those horrible firms I had to work in, and I kind of went out on my own. And this became sort of the mantra, which is getting the job, finding a way to get work. It's going to sound really stupid to you at this point in your life, but no matter how brilliant you are, no matter how talented, no matter how facile, if somebody won't give you an opportunity to build, it doesn't matter. And you can say, oh, but there's all these architects who have these wonderful careers in paper or in a computer screen, but I don't think it's the same thing. You don't go visit the buildings, you don't go see them. And so for me, it was really important to build. I wanted to go out and make things. I wanted to build things. And the other thing that they never told you was you had to convince those people not only to hire you, but let you do all that nifty stuff. So that's the thing that's so hard. Again, getting this work and getting people to let you do it. It's so hard that it drives a lot of the best among us out of the profession. The people who are the most sensitive and the most thoughtful and the least able to deal with that constant turmoil and challenge go away. They go out of it. A lot of them go into teaching. A lot of your professors will be people who are refugees from the real world. And I don't mean that as a criticism, I mean it as an observation. The friends of mine who are teaching that went to school with me are for the most part people who the rigors of a practice office was not something they wanted to follow. Now that's not always true. Other people that are really terrific can do both and do it well, but this has been an experience that I've had. So I want to show you just a couple of projects that we do so you kind of understand what I do. So we had a client bought these two very beautiful buildings that were built in 1985, and they're each about 400,000 square feet. So they're big buildings. And as you can see, they were thoughtfully and sensitively designed. They're perfectly oriented to allow the sun not to shine directly on the glass. They're carefully landscaped to bring out the landscape of North Texas. None of those things are true, by the way. There were a couple of turds. And they were, the core of them were these appalling atriums, which in the 70s and 80s were this very exciting thing that these kinds of things, which were big spaces that everybody thought were really interesting and exciting. They were an architectural innovation that was about 2,000 years old and came back. So this is what the buildings look like on the inside. And at the bottom, there were these sort of planters full of trees that had grown dark and were ill cared for. And then these fountains, which had stopped functioning a long time ago, and in the process had rotted out the pipes underneath the building. They were leaking, and they were undermining the foundations of the building. And the buildings were actually destabilized and moved. So the client said, here, go fix this, make something beautiful. So we were asked to remodel them and find a way to make them fresh and inviting. The two buildings were down to about 16% occupancy. So less than 60,000 square feet of this building were occupied by leasing tenants. So the first thing we thought about were these atriums. How could the space be used? How does the circulation move through the spaces? How would they look from above? Because all the building spaces look down into them. And how could they reinterpret the buildings for new tenants? So our first idea was to do a plan that allowed you to flow through the space. So previously those planters and those fountains wouldn't let you go from one of the buildings in the atrium to the other side. You had to circulate around them. So what we did is we came up with a pattern of steps. So you could come directly out of the elevators and go to the other ones. And then at the top of The steps at the top lead to the entrance to the parking garage. Steps at the bottom lead to the plaza between the two buildings. And then you can see there's two accessible ramps here. So you come in, and then once you're on the upper level. So we had this idea that we would create this sort of garden, and you can see the cafe that we added on the right-hand side. So we had this idea of a shelter within the larger space. So what we did is we inserted this trellis over that space I just showed you. So we give people a smaller scale environment within that giant atrium, where if you had a cafe and you had a sandwich or a coffee, you could come out and kind of sit. Now, the reason these poles are irregularly shaped, as you look here, is we used the golden section as a proportioning system. So the spiral that's spinning around there, see the dotted line? See, it locates all the points on this. And so that gave us a kind of a more interesting sculptural way to organize the space. And then when the columns were installed, they're irregular. So there's a little bit of drama to that. And that helped us set up little things that gave us sort of seating alcoves in the corners and places to sit. So this is what it looks like from above. We connected the dots with steel structure that supports this, and then it's infilled with maple strips. This is kind of what it looks like from above. These are construction photos. It's just wrapping up right now, so it's still getting done. There's a couple of fairly dramatic cantilevers on that structure. So you can see how the atrium side, all the lighter colored paving. And then these were sort of study sketches for the things. So you can see the cafe along the back side. Those are folding glass doors that open up into this space. And then the paving pattern reflects the same pattern as the beams above and runs through the space. And then we used maple and marble and a few other articulations. So these things that follow the lines of the paving, we called those dead men, and they sort of act as stair handrails, and then they connect on these stripes along the thing. And then the light wood sort of makes you look up and see it. But it's translucent, so light still shines down inside of it. And then you can see the way the rest of the building kind of looks into it. So we use maple because maple's a sustainable hardwood. The marble's recycled Carrara, which we use a lot of. We like it. And then there's a access panel wall. One of the young people in our office, just out of school, Ezra, designed this kind of in the same theme, using a repetition of the golden section. But behind this is all the fire panels and the sprinkler panels that support the building's life safety systems. Columns are concrete. They're baby smooth. They're very, very, very nice. Now, this is another project for us was a little interesting. Most of our houses are somewhat contemporary. They're not really cutting edge modern because we don't get hired to do that, but they're relatively contemporary. And so we had a client, a pair of doctors, extremely intelligent, really capable people, who were invited to a social function at a house that we designed for another set of doctors. And they called us and said, we'd like you to design a house for us, which was kind of exciting. And they said, but we're very traditional, and we have a bunch of traditional art and traditional furniture, and we want it to look at home. We love the layout of the house you did. We love the lighting. We love the orientation. We love the natural light. We love the thoughtful materials, blah, blah, blah. But we hate the way the house looks. So that's not exactly a strong referral. You could kind of think that might not be a good idea, but it was 2008, there was a recession going on, and we didn't want to turn down a paying customer. So they said, we love what you did for those people, but we don't want one for ourselves. But we knew we wanted to work with them. And this is one of the things that's been interesting in my career is I envisioned somehow that people would come to you like a blank slate and you would gift them what they should have as architecture, but it isn't like that. If you think about the people you know and the predetermined ideas and things that they have, they come to the party with all of those. And they come with furniture, and they come with art, and they come with spouses and children that all have opinions. And believe it or not, they are not going to look at you as God. Some do, not nearly enough. But anyway, so we did our most traditional house. But it's a far cry from traditional. So what that meant was they wanted clearly organized spaces, defined roles. So you know, in modernism, one of the big themes is this idea of continuing space, one space kind of reading onto the next. So you can see the living room from the dining room out to the outside. They didn't want that. They wanted a dining room that was a space. And they wanted a formal living room that was a space. And they wanted a den that was a space. And they wanted them connected together on some kind of formal path where you would move like a pinball from space to space to space. So we worked on that, and what we did is we created distinct geometries for a living room, a dining room, this long sort of entry hall sort of space. Oops. So we had rooms with clear geometries and local symmetries. And we started to form them as individual spaces, self-contained. We looked a lot at projects that were done by arts and crafts architects at the turn of the last century. People like Boise, Frank Lloyd Wright in his earlier period. People like Green and Green, whose buildings, if you know them, are beautifully articulated. They're definitely modern buildings, but they follow a very traditional domestic program. There's a living room, there's a dining room. People could understand how to use them. And so we looked at those spaces and tried to figure out what we could do. And then we took finishes and furnishings and things and started to piece them into it. So we came up with this idea of these vaulted, centrally kind of symmetrical spaces tied together with a paneling, which was something that was this white on white paneling, and then made the rooms that way. And this client is terrific. We had custom rugs woven for the house that kind of work on the same theme. You can see the stone flooring. But this paneling tied all of these rooms together. It's just white on white painted paneling. And they wanted doors and windows, which is another thing. You know, as architects, we're kind of trained to think of walls of glass, that transparency that allows you to bring the inside outside. These people wanted doors and windows. They wanted window coverings and things like that. So we were always thinking in terms of penetrations in the walls that could be defined as windows, and if they wanted to hang drapes on them, they could. Now, drapes are not a word that normally I think of in a positive way, but we had it here. So, as I said, we looked at precedents that sort of made sense. People like Boise, if you don't know some of these architects, they're worth looking up in the library and kind of learning a little about Green and Green, some terrific people. And then this building, any of you know this? Maurice Docks, the Hilversum Town Hall. This is one of the great buildings of the 20th century. Dudok didn't do very many buildings, but he did this one. And the massing is clear. It fits in a small Dutch suburban town. It's a fantastic building. And it has little elements of color and very fine materials. Black and white marble on the interior there, the sort of uniform yellow brick, these blue glazed brick that are used at sort of certain feature places. And then, as I mentioned before, we had this central hall that all these major spaces sort of came off of. All the rooms had natural light in one form or another. That hall opened off into some surprising spaces at different places. This is on a suburban lot in Dallas, Texas. So the house next door is 10 feet away with setback. So that's one of the realities of it. And so you can see here, these were the sketches that we were doing to try to help develop how it would finally come out. There's a little bridge on the second floor that connects the children's bedrooms, separates them from the guest bedrooms, kind of overlooks this den. So if they're having cocktails, the girls don't have to hear the conversation. So the repeating wood paneling was a really important part of this thing. You can kind of see it used all through the house. Very simple palette. One flooring, two marbles, the white paint, that was pretty much it. And so exterior spaces were important on this house. They wanted real porches, which is another thing. Exterior spaces, you don't see them a lot on buildings now because they're expensive to build. Home builders don't build them at all because the way that the real estate industry works, they don't get counted in the square footage of the house. So since builders can't sell them as sellable square footage, nobody does them anymore, which is one of the nice things you get with an architect-designed house. So from the beginning, this house always had a lot of porches. It has 2,000 square feet of exterior covered space. And those porches are deep enough to be used, so you can actually furnish them and use them. So there's a front porch. So anyway, and then the last house I want to show you is one that we have under construction right now. It's pretty interesting. This is the first, we have a hard time doing architect designed houses for people of modest means. And we're not the rural studio. We can't do work for free, unfortunately. So when we get involved in a project, pretty much the threshold for a single-family home designed by our firm is $1 million. And I know that sounds absurd to you because you say, that's crazy, that's expensive. But if you're running an office and you're running a fee structure on something, the fees that come with about $1 million house allows you to spend 18 to 24 months in design and construction supporting that project. So if you take that kind of idea and think about it, what sounds like a lot of money gets dissipated pretty fast across a distance of time. This couple came to us last year, spring break. They moved here from Denver, moved to Dallas from Denver, and they had a really modest budget. And they were the coolest people I've ever met. This incredible young couple, these two beautiful children, and they really wanted to work with us. And so I said, the only way we can do this is if you structure this house the way I tell you, and we do all of these things in a certain way, and you don't make any changes, and you stay on schedule. So we started to work with them, and we came up with this idea to build basically a long horizontal box that defined an exterior space that could be a lawn and a pool, and have an outdoor eating area and a dining room that were outside of that volume. And so this is a model of the house. It's this long rectangular block. On the ground floor are living, dining, kitchen, a guest bedroom, and a master bedroom. And upstairs there's 3 children's bedrooms and a playroom. And then in the back there's a freestanding garage, an attached garage. And then this piece that comes out over here is an outdoor porch that looks at a swimming pool. And then the dining room, the formal dining room, which looks down the axis at the little green space. So the way this house is conceived, it's all done in SIPS panels, which was, some of you have been interested, it's our first SIPS project. And I want to talk about a couple of things that are pretty interesting about this. We conceived that the upper level would all be clad in cement panels, kind of a hardy panel. The lower portion would be masonry, so you'd never have to paint or do any kind of maintenance on the house ever. And then, because we couldn't afford window walls, all the openings are real windows or doors. So they're a Marvin integrity system, they're a square proportion window, and then they sit in an aluminum frame that sticks out that self-flashes the window. So waterproofing is taken care of in a really, really simple way. This is the drive up the back, there's where the entrance to the garage is. So again, you can kind of see this, lots of natural light, all the spaces will be top lit, the upstairs bedrooms will all be top lit. The lower level has those French doors that kind of poke out of the rooms. And this is that poolside elevation, so you can kind of get a feel for what that all looks like. I don't know why that is repeating. So there's the floor plan, kind of give you an idea. The bottom right is the garage. You come back this curving garage. You go in those doors, right in front of the garage is sort of that dining, living, kitchen is that L shape again. Then there's the guest bedroom, the cluster of the obligatory master bath and closets, and then the master bedroom. And then the stair goes up to the second story, and this same module is repeated with guest bedrooms and things. So I would say it's our first use of SIPS panels. I have seen the future, and I have seen the world change. This project we did in Revit. We sent our Revit files to a SIPS manufacturer who made this drawing. This is all the individual panels, structural insulated panels, right? Everyone knew what SIPS was. And so they made this drawing, then they cut all the pieces for the house. From our drawings, they created these. They loaded all those panels up on flatbed trucks and delivered them to the site with numbers on them. So they're a solid layer of foam, very strong thermal with OSB on each side. They all came out to the site like this. They poured the slab, and in 2 weeks, these were just literally a week ago. In 2 weeks, the entire house will be erected and framed, ready for finished material. It's an amazing thing. It was slightly more expensive to buy the SIPS panels, but the labor involved in putting it up and the savings in terms of time and the performance of these panels is unbelievable. So you can see this is the first panel being tilted up. And then they start to stack them. They tongue and groove one after another. So this is the end elevation of that house. And you can start to see those divides that we talked about earlier. We pulled all the French doors and the bay windows off the house because it allowed more free space inside the rooms for planning. In a tight house, that was kind of a way to do it. So here's interior framings going up. And these were just taken Wednesday. So by Monday, the entire thing will be finished, including the roof. And then you can see here's the dining room. This all went up while one of our people was on the site that day. Tremendous thermal performance. So anyway, that's just a couple of our projects. So just to talk about this, the three projects I showed you, those are not going to appear in magazines, and we'll probably not win any awards for them. But the idea that we get to do things for people who largely appreciate what we do and have fun with them is really, really important. That's the thing I want you to take away from this, is if you're interested in building, you're blessed by being in a place where the culture of building, Texas, allows you a lot of opportunities to do it. If you don't think so, why don't you go try and find a job in Rochester, New York, or Akron, Ohio, or somewhere in the Midwest, and see just how little building there is and how little opportunity there is to do things that are interesting. Because both the economy is lousy and the restrictions on the building opportunities are so difficult that we're really blessed here. There's some bad things about it, but there's a lot of really positive things about it too. So I want to tell you just a couple other quick things. When you go interview for jobs, pay attention to what people are asking you. We had an employee we hired a couple years ago who came from one of the biggest firms in the state, one of the state's firms that has the best reputation, one of the most award-winning firms in the state. And she had worked there for 5 years after school. She went to high profile, she went to Penn, very, very high profile school. She got hired by that firm and became extremely competent in the way that she worked with Revit. So much so that they basically worshiped her within that environment and utilized her to kind of train everybody in the firm in the use of Revit in the firm. And over that 5 years, she developed a really strong position within the firm in the way it worked. But she had made a change, family thing came up, and so she moved to Dallas. And one of the principals of that firm called me and said, hey, we're going to lose this really great person, and I think she'd fit in great at your office. Why don't you consider hiring her? And at the time we were hiring her, we brought her in. Very, very excited. This woman's portfolio was astonishing. And then she came to work with us with over 5 years of professional experience, and she was one of the least facile employees we've ever had, because she went to work in a big firm that took her technology skills and basically used her and never developed her as a well-rounded architect. She never cracked a code book. She'd never gotten to draft a detail. She moved from project to project, setting up the Revit files, setting up the rules for how the projects were going to be done, but she never got to be part of those projects. She never got to design the project. She never got to organize the spaces. So at 5.5 years, she was like an idiot savant of Revit and worthless in a firm like mine, a small firm where everybody does everything. She was completely, she had been really used by this firm. And a lot of firms are like that. You're going to graduate with technology skills that all of us are desperate to acquire in our offices. So if you go into an interview and all they ask you about is your software skills, and all they ask you about, if they're looking at the drawings, is, did you do this in Revit? How did you do this? What software did you bring this into to render this? Your ears need to be up, and you need to be saying, I need to ask some questions here. What are they going to let me do? What kind of things am I going to work on? What are they going to ask me to be part of? How does the team structure here work? Because our ilk eat our young. We beat everything good out of everybody that graduates, and we don't make it a positive experience for them. So I'm telling you that if you don't take control of your own careers and ask those kinds of questions, you'll be really, really unhappy. So anyway, my last little thing is, I envy you, as I said before. You're getting to go out at a great time and do some wonderful things, and I hope it turns out. So anyway, hope you get everything you want. Thanks. Enjoy. Anybody have any questions? Anything you'd like to ask?
I don't think we did it for all, but we basically tapping to somebody who maybe doesn't have the means as much, like a lawyer takes over the whole case and you say, well, we're doing this because we think it's the right thing to do. I think that's relevant for us.
Yeah, no, we do it a lot. We do it a lot. Our firm's 8 people, and they're all relatively young and enthusiastic. I mean, the profile of people that work in my office are amazing. They're incredible. So like earlier this year, there's a somewhat disadvantaged area in Dallas called Vickery Meadows. Some of you may know it, the Five Points area. It's home to a huge immigrant community. There's 80 languages spoken in a 1 mile radius of this particular neighborhood. And they've had a number of significant interventions in the community to help lift it up. And so we got asked to design some public art gallery kiosks that could be built in the neighborhood where the people in this neighborhood could do art shows on weekends, and they would be really durable, cube-like structures. There's a project in London called the White Cube. Some of you may be familiar with it, but it's an exhibition space. And the idea was that we would do 3 versions of those in this neighborhood. And so they're in public right away. So we designed them, we got them built, we beat up contractors that are friends of ours to help us with it. And we did that, and we tracked it at a pretty good cost. But that's a good example of something that we would do. The flip side of that is groups like Habitat for Humanity and a number of sort of similar groups are active in the Dallas area. And so we will occasionally get asked to step in a unique project and help with remodeling of a building. They might get given an old apartment complex. You know, it has mold problems, it has insulation issues. Twice we've been the architect of record for changing those into habitable housing. And we don't get anything for it. We get a lot of good feelings about it, and the people in my office get a lot of experience in horrible, terrible, awful buildings that need a lot of love. But you do have to do that. If you don't do it, you're crazy.
What's the biggest lesson of coming out of the Great Recession?
The biggest lesson of what?
Of out of the Great Recession.
Yeah.
I see people are more upbeat, students and interviews. What did you learn? I mean, I'm sure you didn't saw this coming, right? I mean, nobody was did. For me, I never experienced anything like that, but I'm being in education, so it's a bit different. What can you give us?
I'll tell you the lesson of the recession for me was develop social skills that allow you to sell work to clients and understand what it means to own that relationship. And I will tell you why. My age group, people in their mid-50s who graduated in the 70s and early 80s, that didn't own firms or didn't have business development relationships with clients were slaughtered in this recession. My peer group, 50% of them are out of work and will never go back to work in the profession. They didn't have the computer and technology skills to begin with, so they were in project management roles and designer roles and lead roles. And if the firm looked around at those highly paid, experienced people and they didn't have an ownership of the relationships with the clients, in other words, they didn't have the ability to bring work in, they were jettisoned immediately because they were the most expensive people and the least sustainable. And for about a year there in Dallas, those people that I knew, I had lunch with miserable, unhappy people. And they said, I can't believe X firm, big firms you know, would have let me go after all those years of service. And we don't talk about this very much. I've talked about it a little bit, but you have to be able to create your own destiny. And that means you have to be able to go out there and make people understand the value of working with you and what you do. And I can't emphasize enough. It doesn't mean go out and become a used car salesman. I'll do any building for just $19.95. That's not it. You build this reputation over time. And one of the things that I do a lot of emerging professional classes with they'll get young people who've just gotten registered, and Dallas AIA will sponsor these programs where they'll all come together and they'll ask questions about starting their own firm. And so one of the things I'll say is you start marketing yourself and your firm the day you graduate from college. It really happens before then, but it happens. And they'll go, why? I don't need anybody that's a potential client. I say, everybody you meet is a potential client. For the rest of your life, everyone you meet needs to know that you're an architect. They need to know that you work hard, that you're intelligent. And the way you do that is everything you do, everywhere you go, you're the best you can be, and you bring those problem-solving, graphic design sort of skills to the project. So for example, if you go to a church, you volunteer on committees and you do things and you work hard, and somebody that goes to church with you someday is going to be at work and someone's going to say, we need to build a new building. And they're going to go, I know this great architect I go to church with. Or if your kids are in school and you volunteer in the PTA and they see how hard you work and what you do, and everybody knows you're an architect, somebody's going to go, I want to build a new house. I know an architect. And as absurd as that sounds, my entire career is built on one relationship referring to the next relationship, referring to the next relationship. And some of these relationships go back, almost 30 years. So I didn't know that at the time. I'm just telling you the big secret is go out there, be proud of what you do, tell everybody what you do. Make sure, don't be rah-rah all the time, but do the best you can to make people realize all the experience and knowledge you have, because everybody wants it and needs it. We are uniquely suited to solve almost any problem, and that makes us great volunteers and great board members, great charity donors. We are fantastic for that. You need to know how special you are, and I'm sure your parents have told you, but I'm telling you you're special too. That help? Was that okay with you? I know it's kind of esoteric, but getting work is so critical. It is so, so critical. So, anything else? Thanks. I'm really glad to be here. Appreciate it.